Outlaw Country by Ghotty. Chapter 20, The Inquisitor. The hall was filled with silent shock. I'd expected a little more running and screaming, yet the politicians were made of sterner stuff. Maybe this wasn't the first of the bloodshed in this hall, or maybe they just didn't know how to react. Yvonne's face was shocked and confused, while Emile was actually smirking. Her hands were off her sword, and her posture was relaxed. I suppose shooting someone she didn't like gelled with her. Not that I needed her approval. The two Taoists didn't even flinch, much less look surprised. In fact, Lu Lang nodded approvingly, as if he was completely reasonably okay with this outcome. The guards were the only ones moving. They strode to close a distance, but seemed to move like molasses. They were weakened just like everybody else, so their ridiculously thick armor was probably slowing them down immensely. Just enough to give an extra few seconds. "Cease!" yelled Yvonne. But most of the guards stopped. Most of them. The rest of them would just meet Hoffman. "Cease!" came another voice from behind me, and this time they listened. Power seemed to be suffused through the room, and I felt a physical urge to bow. I shrugged it off instantly, but the guards did not. They stopped their fruitless charge and kneeled where they were standing. It was clearly a skill of some kind. I felt like my soul was under the foot of mud. I refrained from holstering my guns and turned behind me. A man walked through the same poorly decorated gates as I did. His red fur cape only accentuated the locks of blonde, powerful poise. His dead eyes looked straight ahead, and I knew his authority had no question. Truly, he would look more at home in the throne as Yvonne did. Too bad that was the dumbass from the hot springs. He marched over to us, robe trailing behind him, came to a stop next to the 5 guards closest to me, the man who opted to ignore Yvonne's order. "Any of you have hearing problems? Speak now. I'll be honorably discharging you from your service," he said, voice ice cold. He waited a moment. None of the guards lifted their heads. "No? That would imply that you all ignored a direct order from the heir to the throne. Is that correct?" The guards stared at the tiled floor, mouths sealed shut. "That was a question," he roared. And I felt the same wave of power as I did moments ago. The guards all flinched violently and finally responded, Yes, Inquisitor, you're correct." The man nodded, more to himself than to the guards, blue eyes sweeping over them. "Should I take this to mean that you have abandoned your oaths?" The guards were far quicker to respond this time. "No, Inquisitor, we live to serve," they yelled in unison, voices merging together. "Then why did you do what you did?" "To protect your highness." "Elaborate," he demanded, as if he wasn't obvious. The 4 guards turned to look at the 5th, the man who was at the head of the pack. His face was masked by a helmet, but I knew it was sweating. He gulped, trying to hide his confusion, and began to speak. The man attacked a slew of Lord Huffman's. "We feared for Her Highness's safety and sought to restrain him." I wasn't too sure at that point what this little charade was, but I suppose I could let him finish whatever he was doing. The man nodded to himself. "I see. So you believe you know better than her." The guard was silent for a moment, seemingly thinking through his options, and then he slammed his forehead against the floor and kept it there. "Lord Inquisitor, it was a temporary lapse of judgment and my failure on my part. Please punish me in place of my men." How kind of him to take responsibility for the decision they all made, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not quite sure why. The Inquisitor looked down on the guard for a moment and took a knee in front of him, while his robe splayed out across the floor, bleeding in with the tiles. "Raise your head." The guard did so hesitantly. The Inquisitor locked eyes with him. He had no trace of humor. His eyes were dead and cold. "Do you know what kind of a man is likely to fail me?" he asked. He didn't wait for an answer. "One who has made the very same mistake before." The Inquisitor let the words hang there for a moment before continuing. Do you know who never makes a mistake? He leaned in, uncomfortably close. The man who makes it twice. The guard gulped, swallowing his fear, and struggled to hold eye contact. The hall was silent. Yvonne looked sullen. Emile was cringing, and the Taoists were all standing there as still as statues, as if nothing around them concerned them one bit. The noblemen on the late Hoffman side were all trying to become as small as possible. The same could be said for the other faction, only to a slightly lesser extent. It seemed everybody feared the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor stood up abruptly, leaving the guard still kneeling. Despite your failures, I can understand the confusion. Why are we letting a man execute such a distinct individual as Lord Huffman? He swiveled in place and leisurely stepped towards me. In all honesty, I didn't know how to react. Half of me wanted to shoot him, and the other half just wanted to take a shower. Maybe I could still find time in my schedule for both. During my hesitation, he had already reached me. He smiled and put a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't the smile of a vulgar comedian. No, it was far colder. You see, Her Highness and I have suspected Huffman for treason for quite some time. Our new friends here agreed to do me a favor and provoked him in hopes of revealing his true inclinations. He took his hands off me and swept his hands toward the headless corpse, blood beginning to soak into the carpet. As you all heard, he proclaimed Her Highness's authority to be false, and our loyal friend Mr. Jones took exception to that. Not a soul in the ballroom believed him. I could tell by the looks on their faces, and it was an empty lie, which made it truly ironic. And most of that is technically true, but not like it was in self-defense, and I'm sure Yvonne would have not let him get away with it. I suppose my motivations don't really matter anyway. I just didn't like him, I said, shrugging. The Inquisitor's smile grew even wider. Somehow he stared towards the right side of the hall. Nobody likes a traitor. Yvonne finally spoke up. Her poise was crumbling by the second. Her voice was barely steady. Thank you, Inquisitor Hound. And you too, Mr. Jones, for your timely assistance. Guardsmen, see to our new guests and to their rooms. I think we've had a long day. She exhaled slowly, hand over her heart. You are all dismissed. I found myself in yet another room far bigger than it needed to be. It was a guest bedroom of sorts. The design was minimal, yet somehow heavily decorated at the same time. It was filled to the brim with displays of wealth, though nothing held actual personality. Replacements soulless and pristine. Besides, the bed was way too big. I threw myself onto it, only bothering to kick off my shoes. I failed for a moment as I shrunk in far deeper than expected. Good Lord, did I hate this room already. I have an appointment with royalty tomorrow. I would figure out what exactly it is they want from me, and I probably wouldn't like it. I sighed. The princess was right. It had been a long day. I felt like a young boy in a whorehouse, unwelcome and very confused. I wasn't even sure why I shot that obnoxious fool. Being either one of those things shouldn't be a death sentence, yet I cast judgment like it was nothing. It wasn't my place. I looked at my hand, and I clenched it, and I watched the muscles flex under the strain. I suppose that ain't quite true anymore, is it? I'm a big shot now. By pure virtue of my size and proverbial literal gun, they say only God can judge, but if a small-town wannabe sheriff can, well, so will I. I'll be proven wrong when someone puts me in the grave, and not a moment sooner. I'm a fool and a hypocrite, and I'm not so much of either of those things as to not expect my just desserts someday. After all, people who can kill only expect the same. The bed was awful, and I didn't need to sleep anyway. My new body cut down that need quite a bit. Another way, I'm a little less human. Enough stewing and self-reflecting misery. I'm just gonna go find Jeff. I got out of bed and put on my boots and proceeded to wander my way out of the castle. Nobody stopped me, which surprised me, frankly. I found him near the stables, much as I'd anticipated. I just followed the scent of bloody meat, as I'm pretty sure he's the only carnivorous horse they have. He was laying down in the grass, staring into the stars. I walked over to him and stared right along with him. "Do you know your stars, Buck?" he asked in a quiet voice. I chewed on a piece of hay, and I found on the way there, staring into the sky. I knew some of them. "I don't much matter any more," I answered. The sky was bright and with a tapestry of stars, and in more colors than I knew a star could be. I didn't recognize a single one of them. I continued to chew. "We're a long way from Texas." Jeff said nothing. "What's been in your mind?" I asked. I hadn't pegged you for the silent type. His hoof traced out circles on the dirt. "I just don't want to be seen as a monster. Everybody we've seen here is human. They don't have the best track record with non-humans." I nodded along. If people can't accept people because of their ethnicity or gender, then it wouldn't be far-fetched for them to assume the worst. Maybe these people aren't like that. They ain't from Earth, after all. Jeff scoffed in his odd, horsey way. "Do you really believe that?" "Well, no." Another moment of silence stretched on, and I spit out the hay. "I'll tell you what," I began, turning to him. "These folks can't appreciate a fine steed such as yourself, then I'll just shoot 'em." If Jeff was capable of real facial expressions, he surely would be smirking. "You can't solve everything with a gun, buckaroo." I shrugged. "It's worked so far." I walked towards a saddle that was hanging from the stable wall. "Let me ask you a question." Jeff stood up suddenly, full of energy. "What is it?" I put the saddle on and began to work the straps. "Gonna get you shit-faced?" Jeff whinnied thoughtfully. "I have no idea." I finished setting it in the record time and quickly climbed onto his back and patted his side. "Let's go find out."